I'm talking today to Adaobi Tricia Nwabani, who is the author of I Do Not Come to You by Chance. Adaobi, when did you first start seriously writing, and why did you get involved in writing?
Well, seriously writing automatically paralyzes my answer because I don't know when...
You wrote as a child, didn't you?
I did write as a child. But then, seriously, it's probably a good adjective because I did write as a child. I won my first writing competition at the age of 13. So I guess that could be classified as serious writing. Never mind that I didn't necessarily take my writing seriously. And then at the age of 15, I won Best Poet and Playwright in my secondary school, Federal Government Girls College, Owerri. So I guess I've always known I could write. I mean, I'd write letters to uncles and they said, oh, you write very well. So I've always had that. But then all my brothers could write. I had friends who could write, who were winning essay competitions as well. So it wasn't anything outstanding as such. It was just one of the talents you have as a young person. The same way we had people who could dance and people who could sing. It's not something I thought I could do anything interesting with in future.
So when did you get serious?
That's the thing, serious. I didn't write at all, apart from schoolwork, throughout university. And then sometime about 2001, one of my mentors told me, I had a conversation with one of my mentors, and then during the at that time, I realized that I was going to do something more serious. I guess that's the word you're looking for, in future of my writing. But I never really, even then, I didn't think I would write a novel. I always thought about articles, newspaper, that sort of thing, my thoughts, inspirational pieces. I never thought of writing a novel as such. But then in 2000, I actually wrote my first piece of fiction because the essay competition I won at the age of 13 was an essay. It was non-fiction. And of course I had written bits and pieces of fiction, but I hadn't done anything particularly important with them. But 2005 when I wrote my first piece of fiction, actual fiction. And then in 2006, I decided, okay, I want to write a novel. I normally tell people my novel came before my story. I made up my mind, I wanted to write a novel. I could do it. I wanted to do it. And then I started thinking about what to write about. So it wasn't that I had always dreamt about being a writer, writing a novel. So that was 2006, November. And then December, I came upon an idea, started writing in January 2007. And I guess the rest is history. I became a serious, in quote, writer.
And how did your parents feel about their daughter wanting to be a writer?
The thing is, I'm a writer. I can write. I don't see myself as a writer the same way you would say she's a man.
Yes.
Or he's a man, sorry.
Yes.
She's a woman, she's a writer. No, I just see writing as something I can do. Not, my parents don't see me as a writer and that's all they see. I mean, I've had a job, I've had jobs.
And you earn your living partly by freelance writing.
Yes, I worked as a journalist. So and then I wasn't a writer while working for a journalist. I did more editing than I did writing. So they don't see it as something, they don't see me and see a writer and therefore they have to comment or react to this new me. It's just something I've always done. Of course, they're delighted with the fact that my book has done well and that people stop them. Oh, are you the parents of the Nwabani we read about in the newspaper? They like that kind of thing. But I think in his heart of hearts, my father still wants, the kind of life he dreams for his children is you have a good job. Whatever else you're doing, I think he still has that impression. Whatever else, you could do all your writing, hover around the world and speak wherever you want to speak and read. But what do? You
have a good, reliable job. And,
yes, he still has that attitude. So I guess, my writing so far hasn't interfered with any aspect of my life. So they haven't come to the point where they have to decide whether they decide to react to it.
Yeah. So what were your reading habits as a child?
I read a lot, not because it was almost compulsory. Because my parents bought the books we read. I've always read the same way I've always read books. My parents bought all the books we read. I always played chess, Monopoly, Scrabble. I've been playing chess since I was 3 or thereabout. So these are things my parents taught us to do. We just did them the same way you'd eat. But when I was growing up, we didn't read. We read for pleasure, but it was also it wasn't quite pleasure because it was compulsory to read with your dictionary. My father got each of us. We're 5 children. Michael West dictionaries, and he dare not catch you reading without your Michael West dictionary. So it was also kind of like study.
Yes, it was a kind of education.
Yes. It wasn't reading for pleasure as such. Obviously,
so what did you pleasurable. Read? What secret pleasures did you have?
You mean apart from reading?
No, within reading.
What do you mean? Well, I guess it wasn't until my teen years that I discovered humor. Humor writing, because most of the books I read as a young person, my parents bought. and they bought a lot of African stories. They bought a lot of, I mean, I read Things Fall Apart before I was 10. I read Hour of God before I was 10. You know, so those were the kinds of books my parents bought. And I had older brothers, of course, who read these books. So even if they were not age appropriate as such, but I was reading what my brothers were reading. So it wasn't, so I definitely enjoyed them because I know we were always waiting for the next book. And then on your birthday, you always got books. For the next birthday, you look behind the book, like African Writers series. We always got those. And for your next birthday, you look behind the ones, the Heinemann series, and then choose the ones you wanted. And my parents will look for them. If they couldn't find it, they'll let you know, that kind of thing. So books were part of my life.
Yes.
But I know that when I thought, wow, was when I discovered humorous books in my teen years. Because I had my brother, my oldest brother, did some stand-up comedy. And then he was in Unilag. He went to Unilag before he moved abroad to study. And he also did some stand-up comedy in London. Anyway, he had this huge collection of humorous books he would buy in second-hand markets in Lagos. And I didn't have access to those shops because we grew up in Umuahia in eastern Nigeria, where we didn't have access to those kinds of, we didn't have access to those kinds of bookshops and those kinds of piles of second-hand books. So when he was leaving for England to study, he handed me all his books. He had started studying Unilag and then moved abroad to England. So he gave me all his books, a whole pile of humorous books. And after that,
you dived in.
It was difficult for me to get me to read anything else that wasn't humor. It was so difficult. Of course, I've read other books, but I just found out that is kind of writing I love. Whether it's in memoir form or children's book form or fiction or poetry, whatever it is, I love humorous books. So that's where.
Which brings us to your first novel, which is humorous in how it's written. What's the story in I Do Not Come to You by Chance?
People say it's a story about 419, which is the Nigerian, the whole scam thing, internet scam phenomenon. But it's beyond. It's about it's a story of a family as well. It's about a young man called Kingsley, who seeks the assistance of his uncle, a 419 kingpin called Cash Daddy, to rescue his family out of poverty. So yes, it has a lot of 419 happening in the background, but there's also a story about family. It's a story about survival. It's a story about bereavement.
It's a story in a way about how Nigerian society works, isn't it?
Yes, it's a story about
looking for the patron.
Exactly, it's a story about life in Nigeria. Yes, I mean, you read my book and you get a sense of exactly what's happening in Nigeria, what people go through, and the factors that lead people to make the choices they do in different areas of life, not just in 419.
And where does the humour in your writing come from, besides the books you were talking about?
I grew up in I always say that because my family. We've been through some of the deepest crises ever, but we still laugh all the time. And even when my dad is telling you, because my father has a way with words, you still go back after he's shouted and after he's made a fuss, thrown a tantrum, and you laugh about the way he put his words together. My father, during meetings and all, everybody laughs at the things he says. So I guess it's something I grew up in an environment of humor, which is different from my temperament and my personality. Yes, I have a very cheerful disposition. I'm not. You probably will never catch me depressed. But I have brothers who are very humorous. Even my brother who does stand-up comedy, his personality is very different. He's not a very cheerful person, but he's still very humorous. So it's not. So I think it's something.
But you're also a big fan of TV comedy series.
Oh yes, I love British comedies. I do love British
So which British comedies in particular?
All of them. Frank Spencer. Some others do have them. I love Del Boy. What's the one with Del Boy? What's his name again? Only Fools and Horses. Yes. I love, Little Britain. I don't like to tell people I love that because it's a bit vulgar, but then I do like Little Britain.
There's nothing like a bit of vulgarity.
it's sometimes it's overboard. Yes, Prime Minister, all of them, the old British comedies, I love all of those comedies. So I love comedies, and so I guess my sense of humour is sharpened by watching those things as well.
And what's your next novel going to be about?
I don't know if I'm supposed to be talking about it, but it's still the good. What I'll say about my next novel is that it's set in today's Nigeria. It's from the point of view of a 15-year-old boy. It's still I always say, because when I was young, I read a lot of books about poor children, and somehow it glamorized poverty. Because even recently, I was reading a book set in 19th century France, and the family there was so much poverty. But when you read about poverty,
they were poor but happy.
Yes, even if they're not happy, there's something glamorous about it. That they have to wake up at 4 a.m. and grind peppers, and there's something glamorous about that. So especially when you didn't grow up in
romantic.
Yeah, there's something
Yeah.
romantic. That's the
Yeah,
word about
yeah.
it. So I grew up almost thinking poverty was glamorous. I remember I talk about it with my sister now, and we laugh about it. We'll have house helps who came, and they'll put their clothes in cartons of pig milk. And we thought that was so cool. So we'll take our clothes out of drawers and then go and fetch cartons of pig milk and put our clothes. So I grew up thinking poverty was cool. It wasn't until I left home and became broke a few times, experienced what it was to be without money, and then of course observed what poverty does to the mind, beyond what it does to the body and everything else, especially what it does to people's minds. So I have a strong detestation for poverty. So one thing I can assure everyone, the same way you read my first novel, I Do Not Come to You by Chance, and you see what poverty can do and undo, the same way in my second book,
The way it drives moral choices.
yeah, the way it drives choices, the way it just turns life upside down, changes people from who they are. All I can assure you about my second book is that, or rather, one other thing I can assure you about my second, in addition to whatever else the story is about, there's no book I write that will make you that will make you think anything romantic about poverty. I'll make sure that after I don't want anybody reading anything I've written and coming out of it thinking there's anything romantic about poverty. That's for sure.